To please come forward. The reserved seats have been de-reserved. There are no reserved seats. Please come forward. Yeah, that's what a full house looks like.
Yeah, that's what a meeting should look like. Yeah, there are... Guys, just please here.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for the launch of The Last Heroes, P. Sainath's second and latest book that honors, recognizes, celebrates, and acknowledges ordinary Indians who did somewhat ordinary work with valor, courage, honesty, and ended up playing an extraordinary role in India attaining independence. Before I introduce this one-of-its-kind panel to you, and I'll tell you why it's one of its kind. Of course, our gender gives it away, but we all have, except Sainath, black hair, which is normally not a requisite for IIC panels. So before I introduce them individually, I want to show you my copy of Everybody Loves a Good Drought. It's tattered, it's got lots of markings, it's dog-eared. My 4-year-old nephew has also scribbled on it. But I read it first in the late 1990s. I was a student of Sainath's. I was obviously someone less cynical than I am now. I was as feisty. And I think for the next 20 odd years, 2 decades or so, I kept coming back to this book. I kept coming back to this book not just as a journalist, but as a citizen of this country. Whenever in my professional work I felt I couldn't find my center, my work was far removed from the people I hope to tell the stories of, I came back to this book. This is now my copy of The Last Heroes, and I know, unlike many of you, the panel here has read it cover to cover, underlined it, made copious notes, which is why also I say it's one of its kind panel, because it's not here to wing it. It's really studied this book deeply. This is my copy of The Last Heroes, and I have absolutely no doubt that when many among you actually read it, especially the 18, 19, 20-year-olds who Sainath keeps referring to that this book is meant for, but we're actually hoping we'll go beyond that demographic as well, they will find real heroes. Real heroes whose love for this country is uncompromising, who actually speak a vocabulary that is so simple, that is so real, and yet so nuanced. And they're real heroes not created by algorithms. I'll stop here and introduce, as I promised, this amazing panel. It is an all-woman panel. We are here today after having read this book, coming from our own crafts, our own experiences, our own places of privilege or lack of it. And we've all read this book and little parts of it have tugged at us. Some are common and some are different. I'm going to introduce all of them. The way we have structured this evening is that each one of them takes about a minute or two to tell you what about the book most moved them, and then we will all be in conversation with P. Sainath. First here is Sukhpreet Kalon. She's a PhD candidate at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Sitting to Sainath's left is Yusra Naqvi. She's a history student from the Jamia Millia University. And on the extreme left is Janisha Singh, a PhD research fellow at the Ambedkar University, also a counselor of the Ambedkar University Student Council led by the SFI. My name is Anubha Bhonsle and I'm the founder of Newsworthy. And with that introduction, I hand it first to Sukhpreet, who will tell us what about this book moved her the most.
Thank you, Anubha. on?
Yeah.
Thank you, Anva, and thank you, Sainath, for inviting me to be on this panel. I was thinking about the title of the book, The Last Heroes, and we seem to be living in a world which seems quite obsessed with heroes and superheroes. We are revisiting history for tales of spectacular valor, and in mainstream popular culture, even film after film celebrates heroes and people who do these spectacular deeds where they overcome insurmountable evil. And while all of this seems very glamorous on the big screen, in our ordinary lives, we have many heroes, leaders, activists, who have been working tirelessly for decades to build a better society, though without so much fanfare. We don't get to know about many of them. We don't get to know about many of them, just as we did not know about the people featured here in the book, aptly called the foot soldiers of Indian freedom. There is someone here like Demati Dey, who took on the gun-toting British police squad with a lathi. There is Lakshmi Panda, who joined Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's Indian National Army and was one of the youngest members of that army. There is Bhabani Mahato, who got married at the age of 9. Her husband was jailed and she worked in the fields, cooked and fed her large family, and she cooked for revolutionaries who were hiding in the forest. But she never talks about it and doesn't seem to think that she did anything extraordinary. These people are not these are not people whose names will be found in history books. There are no statues that have been built for them. And they did not go on to become ministers and politicians. But they are ordinary people. They are people who did what they had to do and then just got back to their lives without expecting any recognition. And, while reading the book, one wonders that what is it that drove them? And they were just fueled by a sheer dedication to the cause. And just last week, when our Honorable Home Minister urged historians to rewrite history afresh and present a glorious history to the world, I was just thinking how many such people would make it to those annals of history. But we may have some more glamorous tales that may come up. Well, we'll see. But despite these erasures, the heroes featured in the book fill me with immense hope, at a time where there seem to be many, many battles to be fought. Across the world, we are seeing citizens protesting and standing up to their governments. The recent protests in Iran and China are just two examples. In our country, too, we have seen students, farmers, women, even young children standing together, demanding their rights, and holding those in power accountable. Featured in this book here is a cook, there's a homemaker, a farmer, a courier, all who stood up and rebelled and fought against oppression at a terribly young age. There's someone here at the age of 9, 11, 13. It's really remarkable how young they all are. But as Mallu Swarajyam in the book says, the struggle for freedom continues. While independence was achieved, but the struggle for freedom continues. And while addressing a young audience, she tells them, there is so much you can achieve if you will fight. The slingshot was my weapon. The cell phone and laptop are yours. And in this spirit, I want to end by reciting this doha by Kabir, which many of you might remember from school. It's Tinka kabhu na nindiye, jo pavan tar hoye, kabhu udi aakhin pade, to peer ghaneri hoye. So even a small piece of straw, don't underestimate a small piece of straw, because if that goes into your eye, it's going to create a lot of trouble for you. And all the foot soldiers featured here were ordinary folk leading regular lives, but boy did they create trouble. So thank you, Sainath, for giving us this people's history of the freedom struggle and for bringing their contribution to light.
Yusra, do you want to go next?
Hello, is this mic?
It's not on.
How does?
Yeah, now.
Am I audible now? Yeah, so I would first like to thank Sainath for inviting me to the panel. As Supreet said, as a reader, the first thing that grabs your attention in the book is the very title of the book, which states The Last Heroes. When we are talking about heroes of the freedom struggle, we generally perceive them to be male figures, and that too a handful of Oxbridge elites. But the heroes we are talking about in this book are ordinary people who are not so ordinary in their acts. They have made extraordinary contributions to the freedom struggle. They are people like Hausabai Patil. The book starts with Hausabai Patil, who is a rebel, an actor, a soldier, and a spy. She is shown as being beaten up, being thrashed by her husband, but it later turns out that she's actually a spy, a member of the Tufan Sena, and they're all acting it up so that they can steal the ammunition from the police station. So that's what brings you goosebumps when you start reading the book. And the second hero is Salehan, who is a tribal woman, and she's chasing an armed troop of British soldiers with a lathi. She is just 16 years old. So, what is really striking about the book is that it will bring you to the ground realities of the freedom struggle. It's not just the freedom struggle we're being taught in history books in the ICSC board. The history we're being taught about starts with the non-cooperation movement, starting in 1920, ends up in Chauri Chaura 1922. Then starts the civil disobedience movement, then comes the Quit India, and that's how we achieved freedom. No, that's exactly not how we achieved freedom. The book is trying to bring up the realities, and we should not forget what we need to talk about here is that the freedom struggle started with the Adivasis of the Jungle Mahal Hills. It further continued, and it was based on the risks and threats that these peasants, these homemakers, cooks, leather workers and Adivasis were facing on a daily basis. This is what we need to talk about when we are talking about the freedom struggle. Their immense courage, and which they put forward to challenge the authority of the British. And it was not just a revolution against the British imperialism, it was also a fight against caste and class oppression. So that's how the freedom struggle should be studied. And me being from a younger generation, I think what we lack today is that we haven't been able to give these freedom fighters, the bare minimum. That is the recognition as freedom fighters. They at least deserve, if not pensions, if nothing, at least a recognition. So for me, this book is timeless. It has brought to me the words of those people who seek to be an inspiration for the younger generations and who want to be heard, and they want the younger generation to seek inspiration from them and to continue the struggles they have been continuing in the present times. So I think it's a beautiful narration. If you read the book, you'll understand how beautifully Sainath has narrated the incidents that are being told by those people. And the book is truly unique, and as Sainath had promised, it's one of its kind. So thank you. That's all.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm audible. First of all, I would like to thank Sainath sir for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this panel and to read the book. And as the first two panelists have spoken about the numerous characters and their roles in the freedom struggle, so I will not be discussing about some characters, but the way the book has impacted me or the kind of reflections that I have got from it. And please pardon me, I will read it from my notes here because I just don't want to break the flow of my reflections. So the book, through the experience of men, women and students across all castes, creed, gender and religion, is a mirror for our present society to reflect on the meaning of struggle and unity of the masses. Today, our nation is engulfed with a growing sense of barbarity and hatred towards each other. Even many liberals in academia, journalism, and elsewhere have been constantly adding fuel to the fire of division and identitarianism, which will eventually lead to a collapse of the feeling of fraternity in our nation. This book strikes hard at the tendency of a certain class to associate multiple meanings and identities to a mere human whose only concern is to provide shelter and food to the family. In the book, we have heroes like Baji Muhammad, who opened schools for Dalits and Adivasis, Jitendra Pradhan and Chamaru Parida, who led the Dalit temple entry movement in Jagannath Temple, and Mallu Swarajyam, who despite hailing from a landlord family, distributed a lot of her family's land to the half-starving peasantry under the communist call of Bhumi Bhukti Vimukti, that is land, livelihood and liberation. This proves how people across identities can unify to fight the evils of the society. Further, the life of Shobhram Gaharwar from Ajmer, whom Chandrashekhar Azad called Sher Ke Bacche, a lion's cub, which means that you are a brave heart, provides us with an alternative history of the Dalits with the agency to assert and act is in their hands. Shobhram brings an end to the long-going debate between Gandhi and Ambedkar as to who the real messiah of the Dalits is. Reading the life of Shobhram, a question arises as to the relevance of the debate between Gandhi and Ambedkar because we are at a critical juncture where the real life and lived experiences of the Dalits scattered over far-flung areas across the nation are perhaps soon to be lost forever. Even the heroes that are mentioned in this book many of them have passed away, and the ones surviving are not in that stage to carry forward or narrate forward their experiences. So, will this book, The Last Heroes, be able to bring attention of scholars to this alternative history remains to be seen. Lastly, the book presents to us the reality that class struggle was the primary motivating force, and it was the resolution of the workers, farmers, and students and women united that made possible the mobilization that overtook the greatest empire in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Janisha. And I think with Janisha and Yusra, we've brought the average age down substantially. I have nothing much to add after these three amazing women have spoken. But just that when you read the stories in this book, 15 and a village that encompasses so many more, you will realize that each of the people mentioned here have so much spunk, have so much grit, have been fearless, have such simplicity, have humor, and nearly all of them have this inability to portray themselves or their work as something extraordinary. This book, all 15 characters and more, there are lots of subplots and sub-characters, hold numerous lessons for our contemporary times and the so many battles we are all facing and fighting. Above all, as they spoke to Sainath, they showed no despair, no despondency, no ill will towards another community. Fighting for India's independence was an act that was full of joy and uncompromising towards one goal. That's my 2 little cents. Sainath, how does all of this make you feel?
I'll let you guys ask me the question specifically and I'll say things, but I just want to say a couple of things about today's turnout. And I'm just looking at that sea of young faces in the back. You can also come and sit in the front. So many people standing. And if I had to acknowledge all those whom I know and have known for decades and good friends and new friends, there goes the program for the night. Yeah. But, I mean, there are friends all here of my oldest friends in Delhi of 45 years, Abrol, JP, Sitaram. I mean, it's very heartwarming. But there are 2 people at least who I must acknowledge. One is my old teacher. I was never trained as a journalist. I was an attempt was made to train me as a historian. Not the most successful attempt, but a very sincere one that equipped me differently from other journalists of my era. And I would like to acknowledge the presence of my teacher, Professor Romila Thapur. And I would like to recognize and acknowledge the presence of someone who wrote the foreword of this book, whose simplicity and whose genuineness. The man came here in a bus from Ludhiana to attend this meeting, and he's going back in a night late bus to Ludhiana. And how much I learned from him he took me to the place where I got the stories in the Punjab. He drove me around there, and Professor Jagmohan really made me, he recreates in the foreword the world and moral universe of the revolutionary. That is something. And those of you who don't know it, Professor Jagmohan is one of the last surviving relatives, a direct nephew of Shahid Bhagat Singh. And so I have to acknowledge these two people. How does it make me feel? It makes me feel great when I see that the three young panelists, by the way, the average age of this group is 32, if you exclude me. Yeah. So I feel proud when I see that three of these panelists, Anubha, of course, my own student from way back in Mumbai, when I see that the other three panelists are from those universities that have been under such vicious attack for the last few years. JNU, Jamia, Ambedkar University. Look at the caliber of these people who are under attack. Look at the viciousness of the attack on these institutions. Yeah? I really think that itself is a fantastic statement of how I feel. Yeah? And I'll just say two more things before I hand over the stage to you, Anubha. One is, today I noticed a new item has made its appearance on the Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav website of the Government of India. Okay? Your freedom struggle is being dated back 800 years. Under the 75 years of Indian independence, it says, and they are putting heroes from 600 years ago, 400 years ago. You're slowly moving back towards the freedom struggle, beginning with the fight against Alauddin Khilji. Okay, that's what you're doing. And a tweet on the home page of the Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav, which says, they have a did you know tweet. Did you know that there are, in almost all Shiva temples of Tamil Nadu, there is a separate Kashi Vishwanatha shrine. You can see where that's going. Kashi Vishwanatha shrine. Now, how that has to do with the price of fish, let alone the freedom struggle, is beyond me. Now, the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav website is a masterpiece of something. Okay? It successfully, having spent 110 crores on the enterprise called Azadi Ka Mahotsav, the website does not have, the homepage does not have a single photograph, a single video, a single article by or about, a single quote, a single statement, a single illustration or picture of a living freedom fighter. Yeah. It has photos. You know whose photos. Yeah. From government websites to gas cylinders, it's the same photo. There are also videos on him in case they don't want to disappoint you. Yeah. So you have this, and you have a list of unsung and forgotten heroes at the bottom. They have forgotten quite a few in the process, and there are some who are best forgotten. Yeah. But, and an erasure of many, many great heroes. Yeah. It is really, it makes your blood boil to see what they are making of your freedom struggle and the dishonor. And two little things about which they did in the last few months. Nowhere does the website say a word about what colonialism was, what British colonialism did, the 24 famines, the millions and millions of people dying of war, plague, pestilence, famine, nothing, not a word. Yeah. And a month and a half ago, you lower the national flag on the death of the symbol of that colonial oppression. Okay? The symbol of that colonial oppression. What's more, you debase the flag, you debase that flag by changing the code so that the flag, which is always meant to be made of khadi, is made of polyester for the Har Ghar Ka Tiranga, bankrupting thousands of weavers across the country. There are villages that depend on this 2 occasions in the year, Republic Day, Independence Day. They live for it, they swear by it. There were protest marches in far off as Tamil Nadu, where people from a village making the flag for the last so many decades marched to Chennai to protest against this. Not a single contract went to your khadi weavers. Polyester, you know whose flag that is. Yeah. So that, and the idea, the whole erasure of what colonialism was about. I grew up, before I went and found teachers like Romila, there were universities, Romila, the one that I ran away from after 9 days in Chennai, where people still advised us to read Vincent Smith. Okay? The sun never sets on the British Empire. I was born in a freedom struggle family, and my granddad was expelled from Ireland, and we went by the Irish version of the sun never sets on the British Empire, which was the sun never sets on the British Empire because even God couldn't trust those bastards in the dark. Yeah? It was always important for me to have these people's stories told by themselves. It is a very emotional exercise, far more than even a good drought. And I think we need the post-47 generations. We need apart from the fact that they have a right to have their stories told, we need their stories in order to better script our own. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll kickstart the questions. And I think the first question, about the book, is that in your introduction, you've outlined the ways in which the government defines who is seen as a freedom fighter. And of course, you talk about how woefully inadequate that categorization is. But I wanted to begin by asking you that what was your criteria for selecting people whose stories needed to be told in this book? Because I'm sure there are other freedom fighters whom we don't know about. But how did you select these particular?
See, I think it's important, Sukhpreet, to explain to people what that criteria is, yes, on which someone is declared a freedom fighter and given a pension. The Swatantrata Sainik Samman Yojana. There are 7 criteria. There are 7 criteria in law, qualifications that you have to have meet at least one of them in order to qualify and be recognized as a freedom fighter. The top and prominent one is that you ought to have gone to jail. They make a very noble concession for women, Dalits and Adivasis. Instead of 6 months for everybody else, 3 months for you. Now, just think, even today, for a poor Indian to ferret out records of his or her arrest, who can't afford a lawyer to do that or a researcher to do that. Imagine back in the early 1930s, how many people who went to jail could ever provide attestation or proof of their having been in jail. That's one. Second, this is the most outrageous thing of all in many ways. A most outrageous thing of all in many ways is that it explicitly excludes those who went voluntarily underground to fight the British. It only says, if you know, and that rules out millions of women, rules out millions of men, yeah, and it explicitly excludes those who went voluntarily, which means that all those uprisings of the Tufan Sena, of all these, are excluded from recognition as freedom fighters. Also, it says that you can only be recognized in underground resistance. You can only be recognized if you were proclaimed an offender by the British Raj. We are asking the British Raj to certify our freedom fighters. Okay? I mean, it gets insane. That's why in the book I have written about the seven laws of suffering, which you are supposed to have undergone at least one in order to get this done. What was my criteria? From childhood, I mean, I have questioned this idea of what constitutes participation in a struggle. Was it only jail? One person framed it in 4 sentences to me, Lakshmi Panda. My friend Purushottam Thakur, Paresh Rath, I were talking to her in 2007. And this girl, she had been a girl whose parents had been killed in the British bombing of the Burmese railway tracks. And she went and begged and fought with the INA until they accepted her as a kitchen maid. And she asked me, point blank, she said, because I never went to prison, and those camps where she worked were frequently bombed, because I never went to prison, because I was not jailed, did I make no contribution to the freedom struggle? Because I trained with a rifle but never put a bullet in anyone, does that make me not a freedom fighter? Because I did not get this recognition that others did, but I worked in kitchens of moving INA camps which were targeted for bombing by the British. Does that mean I made no contribution to the freedom struggle? And it was all we could think about for the next 3 days. Her question, the anger with which she framed it, that was, I started asking that question of every person whom we thought could be in this book. Yeah.
Yusra?
Okay, since we're talking of the freedom struggle, I'm also reminded of, since you mentioned the Tufan Sena, I'm reminded of Captain Bau's statement. He puts that we were fighting for freedom and independence. We achieved independence. So how is the book highlighting the idea of freedom? And because these people, their roles did not end after achieving independence, it continues till date, and they are expressing their anguish about the farmer struggle, about the CNRC protests as well, because they feel that people are not really breathing freedom in the country. So what do you have to say about that, the idea of freedom versus independence?
Yes, I think you put your finger on a very central point. Every one of them may be in different language. Every one of these 15 people whose life stories are there in this book made the distinction between freedom and independence. The book begins, the first line in the book is from Captain Bhau, who led the Satara uprising when he was the head of the underground army as part of the parallel government called the Prati Sarkar, headed by Nana Patil. And I should acknowledge my old friend Ashok Dable by pointing out that Nana Patil was one of the presidents of the All India Kisan Sabha after independence. And the armed wing of the Prati Sarkar was called the Tufan Sena, and two gentlemen, G.D. Bapulad and Hausa Taib, was an activist of the Tufan Sena, and Bapulad and Captain Bhau led the two squads that pulled off the greatest train robbery in Indian history. And then the attack on the Nandurbar Khazana, where they lifted money equivalent to 6 crores today. Yeah? And Captain Bhau says this at the very beginning of the book. We fought for two things. We fought for freedom, we fought for independence, we attained independence. I think in that sentence, he's just said everything. All of them make this point. You know, independence you have got, freedom, he says in a Marathi proverb, he who holds the hare is the hunter. He says freedom remains the monopoly of a few. All of them say it. When I went back to Salihan's village, 20 years after her death, I found her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren, her grandnephews fighting the same battles against the forest department that Salihan had fought. I went to meet her grandnephew in Saliha village from where she came. And on seeing me approach, he bolted into the forest. 2 hours of searching for the guy. Asked him, why did you run away? He said, you came in a jeep, that means you're forest department. You must be forest department. And unfortunately, I have this habit of wearing khaki trousers. So, that made the picture complete, right? So he said, you should have, this has happened with others before in different forested regions. The forest department is the Sarkar. That is the government they know. That is the government they interact with. That's the government they fought under British Raj. That's the government they fight today. Yeah. So you had that complete issue of freedom before you. The residents of Saliha live in an independent nation without freedom. And there is the erasure, the uprising of Saliha, from where her name came, Salihan, has a monument to 17 people who participated in the uprising, and her name is not there. Yeah. And there are the names of trader and baniya castes who could not have lived in that village in 1930. It was a deep forest village entirely of Sabar tribals. And there is no Sabars in the committee of the memorial of the uprising. Not one. Yeah. So it's the issue of freedom again. You look at N. Sankaraya and Nallakkanne in Tamil Nadu, how eloquently they tell you that, we fought feudalism, we fought gender oppression, we fought untouchability. Those still remain. If we can't fight those, if we can't achieve those, how do we say we have achieved freedom? We have achieved independence. So every one of them made that distinction in their own way, coming at it, saying, you attained independence, not freedom. It's freedom you achieved to some degree, but that mission is far from complete.
Don't we know it? Do you want to say something, Tanisha?
So I'll be back to the issue of identity here. So in the book we have seen how people from different castes and religions, like Baji Mohammed, he's opening up schools for Dalit and Adivasi students. Even the pension or something that he received, he gave it to the school fund. And in one of the Jagannath temple entry movement, it was started by Chamaru Parida. But the temple priest had rebelled against it, that he left the temple, but his son was there and he even denounced his father that what you are doing, your mentality is wrong here. So we are seeing that in that era, different identities were working together. But today, we are at a juncture where different identities are pitched against each other. So from this book and from your experience of talking to them, How do you then look at the legacy of Saji Ladai, Sadadat, and Saji Virasat, that is collective struggle, collective martyrdom, and collective legacy in contemporary times?
See, I think I would look at it in terms of resistance. What happened then, if you look at the characters in the book, they show you the stupendous diversity of the spectrum of people who fought. As Supreet said, farmers, laborers, cooks, couriers, homemakers, yeah, carpenters, malis. I mean, all these, in the Panimora village, all these people were there. And the second thing was that they rose above, in a moment of great need, they rose above caste, they rose above their religion, they rose above everything to focus on a common enemy. And here I want to say, when I first actually thought somebody should write the stories of these people, and that was 1982 Meerut. I had completed 2 years in journalism at the time when I went to Meerut. I had, in my history, the history that I learned, Meerut was a symbol of unity in the uprising of 1857 when Hindu, Muslim, other soldiers marched, even a few foreign soldiers, marched together on the garrison at Meerut. Okay? But in 82, it was shattering with the riots, and then the second round was to come in 87, much worse. It was very shattering, and I really want to share the story with you, because one day I think one has to write more about it. I go to Meerut, nobody assigned me as a reporter to cover the story, but I went after the riots, unable to comprehend what was happening in the city, and I saw a few graves. The graves said, Cahill, Callahan, O'Grady, O'Brien, all Irish names, and said 1857, 58, or 1857, or just 1858, one of these two. No name, no details, no. If you were an Irishman in India in 1857, you were a soldier. There was no other way. After all, the British created famines in Ireland to keep up a steady stream of cannon fodder, right, to the Indian army. So it made me, now, there were no, why were these people, these graves were outside the cantonment. They were not in the churchyard of the cantonment. Who were these people? What happened that day? And oddly enough, I got the confirmation of the incidents of that period from the US Consul General in Mumbai, whose ancestor had been a soldier in this army. What had happened was, as Hindu and Muslim soldiers marched on the garrison, it was defended by Irish soldiers, always the frontline cannon fodder of the British Army. In fact, the good old British general was famous for saying, in trouble, in crisis, waste the Irish. That was their approach to the Irish. And at lesser level, Scots. Now, these converging people marched and they were faced with the Hindus, Muslims, Irish Roman Catholics, Irish Catholics. The Irish on the front lines of that place, of the garrison, they didn't know who these guys were. They didn't know anything about Hinduism or Hindus. They didn't understand Bhojpuri, Awadhi and Braj Bhasha, which was spoken. They didn't understand Persian or Urdu that was spoken by the Muslim soldiers. They knew of another Islam. They didn't know Indian Muslims. But you know what those Irish guys knew? They knew who the enemy was. At the last moment, several of the Irish soldiers turned their guns on their British officers and shot them dead. They were excommunicated, possibly blown away from cannon, I don't know, but their graves are outside the cantonment, without any epitaph, nothing. Okay? I think it would make an incredible film, honestly. You know, what a situation, what a scene. And that was, because remember this, the Irish soldiers had experienced British colonialism for 650, 700 years to that point. They didn't know the Hindus, they didn't know the Muslims, they knew the British. Okay? And Irish soldiers were involved in many rebellions in Vellore, in elsewhere, they were involved in other rebellions too. So it meant that idea of struggle, uniting, bringing people together also shows up in these 15. How they coordinated, how they went to each other's help when it was necessary, how movements cooperated and hid people. Shobharam Geharwar, whom you mentioned, for me is in many ways the most striking and interesting character in the book. How he is calling on us to rise above those divisions you're speaking of. Shobharam Geharwar is a Dalit. And my thanks, unending thanks to Kavita Srivastav, who she's somewhere here, who found Shobharam Geharwar for me, because our histories have marginalized and simply sidelined the role of Dalits and Adivasis. If you look at the Nagpur Vidarbha Lal Sena, it was chock-a-block full of Dalits. Okay? But we don't acknowledge it. They were not, they were not heroic. They were lower caste. They were untouchable. Shobharam Geharwar is a Dalit. At age 97, he's not very far from here, but his family won't allow him to so easily move about. He is in better physical shape than I am. Okay? He walks faster than I do, and I kept fearing that we would get run over in the traffic because of the way he kept cutting across the market. Shobharam put this debate on identities and division, he thrashed it in 4 lines. Okay? Shobharam, I asked him, I quaked as I asked him. He was a cantankerous old guy and he gave me a phrase I had never heard. He made me understand, don't pigeonhole us. There were many influences, many principles operating on them. He gave me a lovely phrase. He said, "Maine dono nadi mein tha, Gandhivad or Krantivad." He was making bombs on the one hand and had sworn Gandhian on the other. Okay? He saw no contradiction in it. And then we were sitting interviewing him. Kavita helped me do that interview and translated for me. And he said, "Aapke paas jeep hai kya?" He said, "I want to garland Baba Saheb's murti in the market." It was Ambedkar Jayanti. So I asked him, quaking a little bit. He by the way, is a self-declared Gandhian, die-hard congressman. Though when I asked him about the congressman bit, he said, "Suno, main asli Congress mein hu," meaning dissident. Okay? Main asli Congress mein hu. And this man, then I asked him, how did someone like you, a self-declared Gandhian, never mind the bomb making, how did a self-declared Gandhian like you choose between Gandhi and Ambedkar as he put the garland around Ambedkar? He got angry. He didn't like it. He said, "Why should I choose? You choose?" Huh. What principles of the Mahatma I admired and respected, I follow those. What principles of Baba Saheb I respect and admire, I follow those. Who is anyone to tell me to choose between the two of them? And the title of that story is, "Must I choose between Gandhi and Ambedkar?" So you had that sort of rising above those. Multiple identities you see in, and Shobharam, the guy is really, really, really something. Here is a person who's led a far more spectacular life than any of us will ever lead. Yeah, he is meeting Chandrashekhar Azad at age 5, escorting him to the bomb-making factory, which they had so that it looked like an innocent uncle with 2 nephews walking scene. That this was 3-4 weeks before Azad killed himself in what is today known as the Chandrashekhar Azad Park. And when he then goes on to make bombs, he goes on to carry a courier for bombs. He then becomes a letter courier and he's delivering letters to Ambedkar in Baroda. He's delivering, and he's very proud of who hid him when he ran away to Mumbai. When the leadership sent him to Mumbai, he says, "Jante hain, kisne humko, rakha?"
We want to give the answer.
Huh? Okay.
We want to give the
okay,
answer.
you give the answer. Right.
All of us.
Yeah.
Prithviraj Kapoor.
And he is so pleased about it, he doesn't realize who the other person was whom Prithviraj sent him to. He says, "It was great, Prithviraj, and he gave us a car and we went around." And Prithviraj was a member of the IPTA. And they were close to IPTA was very much a part of the freedom struggle. And he says, "But you know what? He is a busy man and a big man. He sent us to one of his cousins. I don't know, and by the way, he didn't connect that cousin was a bigger star than Prithviraj Kapoor. It was his own brother Trilochan Kapoor who had the biggest grossers of 49, 50 and 51. Yeah, so look at the guy's life. Chandrashekhar Azad to Prithviraj Kapoor to taking bombs to Varanasi. What a story, begging to be told. So, there are so many of in Telu and Loki Mahato, how they rose above their identities. The Kurmis are a tribe. They see themselves as a tribe. It remains the biggest demand in the Jungle Mahal, the Kurmis. The British punished them, kicked them upstairs into OBC because they were simply a nuisance to the British. And they have never stopped fighting for the restoration of tribehood. Telu and Loki, their immediate hero is a Subhash Chandra Bose. Because they are Bengali, they are in Purulia. Bose meant everything. At the same time, there was this distant figure of a Gandhi. And in the middle was their immediate heroes, a couple of dacoits. Straight out of Eric Hobsbawm's Social Banditry. And those two dacoits were people who defended the poor peasant, poor landless against the zamindar. They would take on the British to help the poor. And that's why the story is called Between Bapu and the Bandits. And one lesson I learned from all of them was that in the issue, don't pigeonhole, don't categorize them. I found that a very large generation, not everybody, but a very large generation that I would describe as leftist by political persuasion and ideology, Gandhian by moral code and principle. That Shobha Ram is that person for you. And I remember an EMS Nambudripad who lived the austere real life of a real Gandhian while being completely undiluted a revolutionary leftist. Okay? And I'm saying that seemed to characterize so many of the characters I met. And therefore, how easily they moved between streams and how deeply they were influenced by different streams. So that, I'm saying all those struggles, I see the lessons of people rising above each other, reaching out to each other across divides of caste, class, gender, and ideology, and putting up the fight against the enemy they knew.
Sainath, the travesty is that many of us have actually grown up with the idea of courage or valor or sacrifice in really one frame, right? You've mentioned gender here, and there are so many women as part of your book, as characters, but also subplots, sub-characters, the wives who have taken care of the family. I laughed, and I almost sort of laughed with poignancy when I read The Certificate of Salihan, which is actually a eulogy to her father. The fact that she chased down the British and along with her a whole group of women, possibly her own sister, in the measly certificate that was given to her, found no mention. The eulogy was to her father. I was also drawn to Bhavani. And I think you write in such great detail that she didn't have a moment to herself. She would cook and cook and cook. How do we bring all of these actions, seemingly normal, everyday, seemingly stereotyped in gender roles, along with the freedom struggle?
I think every one of them brings out the kind of gender situation you had then and draws your attention to the fact that it is there now. Yeah. Now, Hausa Bai in the drama, fake drama she staged in front of the police station that Yusra told you about. When I asked Hausa, her fake husband was pretending to beat her in front of the police station. The idea was to draw the policemen out of the station so that their comrades could loot the police station. And when I asked her 74 years later, Hausa Bai, what is the most distinct memory you have of that drama? She said, that scoundrel comrade, he hit me too hard. And she was laughing. Okay. Then I said, Namita Vaikar and others who were translating, they said, didn't you tell him to stop that he was hit? She told me, I told him, you're hitting too hard. And he said, no, you see, he said, it has to look authentic, otherwise they won't come. Because he was making the point that man beating wife is not going to excite the police. That's the national sport. Yeah. So it had to look like a murder to get the police out, and that too because the murder would occur on their doorstep of their station. There would be uncomfortable questions. So that's one. The second
And after that beating where she swam on the Mandovi.
Yeah, she swam across the Mandovi river at night. And this was no cruise on the Mandovi, okay? In those days, the only things cruising around the Mandovi were crocodiles and at that hour. So she does these amazing things. And there are so many beautiful personal protests by women within what her father was Nana Patil. Yeah, the head of the Tufan of the Prati Sarkar. When Nana Patil was arrested and taken away, their lands were confiscated. The British put up their lands for auction. No one in the village would buy the land. They said, Nana has not murdered anyone. He has not killed anyone. We cannot help his family because of fear of our own. But we will not buy Nana's land. We will not do that. Anyway, they were confined to a small room. The house was sealed. All rooms in the house but one were sealed. His mother, Nana Patil's mother, Hausa Bai's grandmother, she made a protest. Okay? When I heard about it, I don't know how you'll feel, but I can tell you how I felt. They had nothing. Their clothes were locked. Everything was locked. She had one lungi of her son, Nana Patil, a white lungi. She cut it, stitched 2 blouses, and from 1929 to 1947, wore those same 2 white blouses as her protest against the Raj. When independence came, their land was given back. She deigned to wear other blouses, but only the color of that lungi. And the silent heroism of Gocharbai and the silent heroism of that kind, again, whether in the Lakshmi Panda or this, the way of treating women, your Pension Act, Swatantrata Sainik Samman Yojana, do you know what it says? It doesn't use the word spouse for survivors, it uses the word widow. So you are assuming that the freedom fighter is necessarily a male. Yeah, all those prejudices are so with us even now. Mallu Swarajyam was to the last acerbic attacking, about men and male behavior, and many men were at the receiving end of her. Believe me, it's not fun. I got slammed by asking her dumb questions in front of an audience. I knew the answers. As a journalist, you have to ask some dumb questions for the audience.
But I loved how what Bhavani Mahato said to you when when Sainath asked her about, do you do the charkha? And she said, you think I have time?
I got married at 9. And she said, I don't have anything. Do you think I had the time for your great philosophical questions of satyagraha and ahimsa? Well, that's what she said. I am hopeful, by the way, that she is reinterpreting her own story now. Because yesterday we got a message from her grandson via Smita Kator, my colleague in Kolkata, that they are hoping that this program is live streamed because she wants to watch it if they get network on her grandson's phone. She is 104 turning 105.
I think we'll just have time for maybe one or two more questions from us, and then we can, I think, throw it to the audience.
Anubha spoke about it, that, and we all, while reading the book, we were really struck by the extraordinary fortitude of the people in this book, who continued to fight for social causes well after the nation's independence. And, as Yusra said, that we've seen so many protests in our country. But while interviewing them, while looking at the fact that all of these freedom fighters continued to fight for the causes that they believed in, what, according to you, would be some of the lessons that would be relevant to people today?
I think, when you say that they continued to fight, a Sankaraya and a Nallakkannu are still giving public lectures, and one 102 years old, one 97 turning 98. This Nallakkannu, Nallakkannu of the CPI in Tamil Nadu, they were all one party at one time, at the time of the freedom struggle. Nallakkannu, we asked him when he is 95, Comrade RNK, are you still going out, traveling much and doing a lot of lectures in different places? He says, he tells, comrades, I'm old now. I go out only once a week. He gets out of Chennai once a week, okay, at 95, and tells us that he's not traveling much now. He's not doing much now because he's old. Okay, Shankaraya at 98 travels to Madurai to inaugurate the Progressive Writers Association meeting, standing and delivering an oration as the keynote. Yeah, and Captain Bhau, who went into the Peasant and Workers' Party, the PWP. Captain Bhau, in the 2018 agitation, Ashok, he was already 95. He was already 96. And when he heard about the call of the Kisan Sabha and the other organizations in the farmer struggle, this 96-year-old, or 95, 96, whichever he was, comes out onto the streets of his village in Sangli, and I see the photograph sent to me by Bharat Patil, and I ask Captain Bhau when I next see him, I said, Captain, what were you doing out there? It was bloody 40 degrees heat. And then he said, Janisha, what about those continuing divisions? And he said, then also I fought for farmers and laborers. Now also I will fight for farmers and laborers. When he was desperately ill in 2018 and 19, when the farmers' agitation was peaking, he sent a video message to the farmers at Delhi, at Jantar Mantar, and Hausa Bai also. If we were in slightly better health, we would be marching with you. We would be there with you. That video was played to the farmers here who were gathered at Parliament. So you had that continuing of that spirit of struggle and fight. But I want to say one very important thing in how you define freedom fighters. I find it ridiculous. If I ask people to give me their list of freedom fighters, I have never found people giving me a list with the name of B.R. Ambedkar in it. Now, according to me, the Constitution of India is the finest distillation, the finest essence of the ideals and idealism of the freedom struggle. And the chief craftsperson of that has to be seen as a great, great freedom fighter. A man who launched the greatest battle for human dignity on earth, a battle that continues to this day, and to which all of us contribute very little, I'm ashamed to say. Yeah. So when you look at who these, and the continuing battle, I want to say one thing. When the CAA protesters were mobilized around the city of Delhi and in other cities, what were they reading? They were reading the ideals that those freedom fighters in the book and Ambedkar in the Constitution enshrined. Justice for all, social, economic, political, liberty, fraternity. This, though I kept telling my little young friends and my students in the protest that, there are a few pages after the preamble also, and, they're not going to kill you. Reading them is not going to kill you. Try reading the directive principles of state policy, for instance. Okay? I'm saying, look at that spirit, how it comes down. It goes back to the ideals of the freedom struggle. They're reading out from the Constitution of India. And I will also say that perhaps the greatest expression of coming together, of fighting, of resistance, of showing us the meaning of resistance, came from that Kisan Andolan at the gates of Delhi. The greatest, prior to that, the biggest, largest movement against injustice and inequality was Occupy Wall Street, which a Mallu Swarajyam, who couldn't speak a word of English, eloquently told 1,500 techies, of course you can fight. It's people like you who are in Occupy Wall Street. And she told them about Occupy Wall Street, a bunch of 21-year-old techies. And then they asked her, yeah, it's all very great. You went around with the slingshot and a rifle. What can we do? And that's when she said, my weapon was the slingshot. Yours is the mobile phone and the laptop. Use it to fight for justice. All of it comes back to justice, the justice that was the objective of the freedom struggle, the end to inequality, that was what these people were fighting for. That, I think, that trend continues, and in the farmers, in the Kisan Andolan, Occupy Wall Street lasted 9 weeks. The Kisan Andolan lasted 1 year. One of the worst winters in 40 years, one of the worst summers in 40 years, rain, hailstorm, met with a mobilization worthy of the line of actual control on the Chinese border, where the government violates the law and destroys huge stretches of the highway, digging huge trenches for which you are supposed to be paying losses according to the court's ruling. Yeah? And that kind of resistance, they didn't end the agrarian crisis. That was never going to be the result of the struggle. But they showed us what resistance means. They lasted for 1 year, and they made Mr. Never Blink shut both eyes. Yeah? So I think there is a continuity, there is a spirit, there is a resilience. And those in that CAA and other movements, they were so young.
Yeah, I think which is why we believe that, yes, I think we should give that a clap.
All of you standing out there in that age group, yeah.
Which is why we think that this book has complete resonance for each one of us, for this generation, for the many standing at the back. Should we open it up for questions?
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a mic?
Yeah, there is.
Can you please give him a mic?
My name is K.S. Subramanian.
Yeah.
I served as a bureaucrat for many years in the Northeast.
Yeah.
And I have come across the most fanatical freedom fighter, a woman from Manipur. Her name was Sharmila Chanu. She fought for 16 years on a hunger strike demanding the repeal of Armed Forces Special Powers Act. 16 years she remained on fast without eating anything, and she was fed forcibly by the government. But she could not succeed in her demand for the removal of Armed Forces Special Powers Act. The act was continued, but she had to give up her fast and get out of, because of pressure from a public spirited individuals, she had to give up the fast and become a normal person. She married and got out of Manipur. But she is the greatest freedom fighter in the Northeast that I have done, and she is a woman. Of all people, she is a woman. And very, very great about her.
Okay. Yeah, question. That's a comment. So, yes.
Go ahead.
Ask some of the young people
Yes.
particularly.
Do you want to? Yeah, you can speak. Sir.
Congratulations on the book. I just wanted to point out what you were saying, that the rules for declaring freedom fighters and all of that. Because I had worked on a project about 20 years back in which I had interviewed a lot of people, and I think which you may have stumbled upon as well. You see, there's a very strong, systematic, almost like a caste system in the freedom fighters. And because the Congress party wanted to monopolize, so you had N.D. Tiwari, Zail Singh, etc. also as freedom fighters. That is why they put all these stringent conditions which made sure only certain organized, mainstream people who came to power and their associates. So that, I think, is a reason rather than some bureaucratic thing, number one. Number two, I thought you could comment on, of course, such as the people you have highlighted, they are one lot. There are other freedom fighters who are well known. For example, Bhagat Singh, as you mentioned at one time, Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, Sukhdev, all of them tried for the same charges, hanged in the same place, etc., etc. They've been dropped off. So that kind of thing which is happening, we are not only forgetting some from before, but the ones which we knew are also being, depending on the political service they provide.
Yeah, but I do make, please. I do make that point about I do make a point about their being erased, and that the rules were never neutral. That point is made in the introduction, that the rules were never neutral. You see, there's one of my favorite sayings is the Swahili African saying about history. I don't know if my old teacher has heard that one, or I have said it so many times it's likely she was forced to. But this old African sayings goes, if lions were historians, the tales of the jungle would not always favor the hunter. If lions were historians, the tales of the jungle would not always favor the hunter. Who were the historians? Who were the people who brought it in? You're right. Of course, the writing of each and every law, whether it's the 3 farm laws or of the Swatantrata Sainik Samman Yojana, was imbued with the politics of the ruling regime. That's going to happen. Yeah. It's a question of whether we can do something about it, whether we can turn that around and see that Lakshmi Panda, all she wanted was the recognition. Look, Sankaraya said, we fought for freedom, not for pensions. The left parties denounced the idea of a pension and said, we will not accept it. Though I have to tell you today, I wish they had. Because when I look at the condition of the Telangana fighters, their medical condition, I so wish that at some point, at least 10, 20 years ago, that they had reopened the debate and said, let them be given that pension. So various people were excluded on grounds of different political impulses. That is one. And the second point you made was about...
The ones we know are being, some of them are...
Yeah. Oh yeah, of course, the ones we know are being erased. When you have a minister in Karnataka saying he will remove Bhagat Singh and Tipu Sultan and bring Savarkar in the textbooks, I mean, and you know that the entire... The backlash it produced, the anti-hijab and all those things became necessary to draw attention away from that boo-boo that he made. Okay? So it's a very systematic thing. And what fascinates me is that it's not just an erasure and rewriting of history, but these guys are rewriting their own rewriting. In 1992, or in the 1990s, K.R. Malkani, the founding vice president of the Bharatiya Janata Party, wrote a book which I would advise all of you to read, at least one chapter. The film by the TV serial Sword of Tipu Sultan by Sanjay Khan was being shown, and there were some protests in those days. Yeah, there were, and the BJP, a very young party which had embraced, I don't know how, but for a few months at least, Gandhian socialism. Yeah, I mean, they're very embarrassed by the mention of that, but the official record is there that they declared themselves for Gandhian socialism. Anyway, they asked their historian K.R. Malkani. Now, many of us, like Dada Abrol and I here, we knew Malkani personally. We had been with him in the anti-WTO, anti-GATT, and the GATT anti-WTO agitations. And we all used to have discussions with him. Malkani was important to me because he was a journalist, and the only journalist who edited Organizer. He was editor of Organizer and Panchanya. Okay? 35 years editor of Organizer. That is some credentials. Okay? Now, hardcore, I mean, he was so hardcore RSS, nobody can question those credentials of his. He writes a chapter in the book India First. He made an inquiry into the credentials of Tipu Sultan on the request of his young political party. And he concluded that Tipu Sultan was not only a great freedom fighter, that he was the only Indian prince who died in battle on the British, personally fighting to the bitter end, who never compromised with them. And his chapter ends that Indian independence was set back 150 years by the death of Tipu Sultan in the field fighting the British. Now, the credentials of K.R. Malkani, none of these guys of ministers of Karnataka, who sometimes, some of whom may have been in the Congress 10 years ago, none of them can claim to have those credentials. Yeah? So they are rewriting their own rewriting also. That is also happening, yeah.
Are there more questions? Otherwise, we have many. Yes.
Is there a plan to take these stories in languages of these last heroes or closer to them?
Already 6 languages have been fixed up. Another 4 are being determined. Everybody Loves a Good Drought. My previous book exists in 12 languages now. And if I remember, there were stories that you and Jayashree were part of as people who explained things to me when I went around Alirajpur and Jabua. That exists now in 12 languages. Very soon, I think by February, the Marathi edition of this will be out. The Marathi, and because there are 3 Tufan Sainiks in the book from Maharashtra, the Marathi translation is already underway. People's Archive of Rural India, of which I am founder editor, publishes every day in 14 languages. Okay, and we think Indian languages are the soul of the countryside and the soul of this country itself. And I also want to tell you one thing more. If you look at the book, if you open at the end of each story, there is a QR code. If you scan the QR code with your phone, you will go straight to a new section on People's Archive of Rural India called Freedom Fighters Gallery. The story of Mallu Swarajyam swinging her slingshot. You'll see her doing it before an audience of 1,500 on the website when you look at her video. And you will look at the families, the descendants, all the photographs, and I'll keep adding to them as I keep going back to those villages, which I do. Yeah. So the languages, you can be absolutely sure it will come. Our aim in PARI, we have just added Chhattisgarhi 6 months ago. In the coming year, we want to add Bodo and Bhojpuri. That is our aim. We have 170 translators, most of them volunteers, some of them university professors. Okay, and 45 of them active in any month. So take it from me, every language that we can find a publisher in, it'll appear. Yeah.
Yes.
I just wondered, climate change, if it's part of your freedom struggle, which is very much the problem today.
I think, yeah, yes, okay.
And I wanted to know
Yeah.
if that is also constitutes a part of your concept of freedom.
I think that for me, very importantly, I think the struggle is what I would call, that struggle is what I would call one for climate justice. And I see it that way. And if you went to the People's Archive of Rural India, you will see the biggest section on climate issues that you will see in any publication that you can name, and not 200, 300 words or 2 minutes or 20-second sound bites, but 30 substantial stories ranging between 2,000 to 3,000 words from 30 regions of the country, from people who are never covered in the media, like nomadic pastoralists. Yeah. So yes, we take that very, very seriously. Yeah.
Should we? Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Hi, at the risk of owning to a failure on my own part, I would say that there's so much content being generated all the time. It's talking about untold stories and rewritings of rewritings. How would somebody who's also, let's have a very busy schedule otherwise, really filter out what is the truth and what is just propaganda or fake news?
Well, you know, the one thing is, it's not just the reading, though I think reading is extremely important. Every year, and I have been teaching for 37 years, and I tell each batch of students that there is a very superior technology and a very superior software package, you know, and you can get it in hardware, and it's called a book. You know, you can read. The other thing is reading and what you do with your reading. You know, Cervantes said of his own character, Don Quixote. He said something about Don Quixote that I keep pinned up on my notice board. Reading everything he came across made Don Quixote a great man. Believing everything he read made him mad. Okay, so I'm saying, how do you decide? I make for my students a list of the 100 great books that will transform your life or your money back. Those will be difficult with some of the authors because they wrote 2,000 years ago. Yeah, but I'm saying that reading with discernment, with perspective and analytical mind, that, by the way, is what these three people here represent in their universities. They have a different kind of reading. They are taught a different kind of history. They are taught a different kind of engaging with historical material. I think that every one of us ought to do that ourselves. Every one of us has to have that discipline. And in journalism, it's the very first thing. I define journalism as the art of the question. You know, it's the art of the question. Yeah. Now, what has happened is that the corporatization of just about everything, including soul and intellect, has made it very, very difficult for us, because those who control the publishing world, they are publishing for profit, they are publishing for things, and no newspaper, the average national newspaper, your problem is very real and genuine. No national newspaper gives, or the average national newspaper on its front page gives 0.67% of space to news from rural India. And that's a figure from Center for Media Studies, Delhi, Mr. Narayan Rao's. And that's an exaggerated figure, because the 0.67% is a 5-year average. One of those years is election year, when the coverage goes to 10-15%. Okay. The thing is that we have to question. We really, and the media have to be confronted and questioned always, all the time. There is one of your media could not tell you that the great tradition of Indian journalism, the really great tradition of Indian journalism, it had its 200th anniversary on April 12, 2022. The 200th anniversary of Raja Ram Mohan Roy's Miratul Akbar, where he did an editorial so powerful that it brought the district judge of Comilla before whatever was the top court of that time. Plus, when they passed laws to silence the press, not the vernacular press laws, 50 years before those, he wrote an editorial closing down the Miratul Akbar, saying that I will not subject to such inhuman and degenerative and such kind of circumstances. And he was a clever and wily guy who also shifted all he wanted to say to Sangbad Kaumudi. Okay? And he was also, without acknowledging it, making the shift from writing for the elite to writing relatively for the masses, from Persian, which was the language of the elite, to Bengali, where he could reach a wider audience. Now, look for that kind of courage today. In the big difference that has happened in the media, why the media cannot tell you the truth, they can't afford to tell you the truth. The Indian media they have a structural compulsion to lie because of who owns them and what they need to do with that machine. There are now two schools of journalism and stenography, or rather corporate stenography. And you decide which one you want to follow. Yeah. But your knowledge, the day is gone when you could get all your information from one newspaper or one magazine or one TV channel. That day is gone, right? So you have to choose. I mean, I look at counterpunch.org for international affairs and analysis. In India, I look at The Wire, I look at Frontline. Yeah, there are a number. Each of them covers particular things better than others do. You need to make your menu and inform yourself, but you always need to be engaged in discussion with others to sort that out.
Thank you.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah.
What changes do you see in class 10, 11, 12 students once these stories are included in their curriculum? And do you fear that these stories might be utilized by this government obsessed with history rewriting to achieve the end of history rewriting?
I would love to see them utilize these stories to achieve their understanding. When one character after the other is blowing the ideological legs of these people. Bhagat Singh Jugyan, when I asked him, this is not Shahid Bhagat Singh, but Bhagat Singh Jugyan, whom Professor Jagmohan took me to his house. When I asked him about Shobha Ram Geharwar first, I asked him, in this entire political spectrum, here you are, Gandhivad, Krantivad, Ambedkarvad, all this, what about the Hindutvavad? And he said, "Wo, ek ungli nahi katai." No? So let them use that story, please. Bhagat Singh Jugyan says, that sweet old man, a guy who was expelled from school at the age of 11, and a letter issued by the Department of Education, the board blocked education, this boy is a dangerous revolutionary. 11, okay? And he bears the one time in his lovely storytelling he breaks down and cries is when he comes to partition. He can't take it. That kills him, okay? The old man, his tears are flowing, he's talking about his classmate, Afzal Tawsif, who went on to become one of Pakistan's great writers in Urdu. And he remembers that when he won the first prize, he beat Afzal by 1 mark. And he starts crying again. And because he never saw her again after that. Though when she came to India, he wasn't there. He was in another part of the country. And he says, do you know, Afzal left. She wakes up one morning, in one night, 18 members of her family were butchered by these fanatics. And then, so he dismisses their role completely, and then he ends with saying, but believe me, one day the sun will set on this Raj too. Let them use that story, please. I'll pay them.
Mr. Sainath, the way you refer to freedom and independence, you said freedom is achieved and not independence.
No. I said independence is achieved and not freedom. And they said it, not me.
Yeah. So can we extend it to for economic freedom also for further?
Of course. Of course. You're talking about economic freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, one of the great motivating factors of all these people was the indignity and inequality they saw imposed on themselves, their families, their livelihoods, their communities, like the tribes, and why they fought and how they fought. Today, if you look, by the way, the website and the numbers I'm quoting, I am the greatest follower and writer of that. I'm the greatest follower of that website. It's called Forbes. You know, it is the oracle, not of Delphi, but of Pelphi. The Forbes magazine is the oracle of global capitalism, as you know. They make a list of billionaires every year. In 1991, India did not have a single dollar billionaire. Then we embraced the brave new world. The market is God. We did all that. Then by year 2000, there were $8 billionaires. By year 2012, the year we launched our socio-economic and caste census, there were 53. By year 2019, there were 80 odd. 2020 March, they come out every March. Forbes has this eccentricity that it publishes its annual list of global billionaires every day on International Women's Day. Maybe it's an aspirational thing for the girls. Okay? There may be very few of you here now, but if you work hard, the promise of capitalism, you work hard, you will become a billionaire too. Which logic has always baffled me, because if hard work makes you a billionaire, then every woman in rural India, Africa, and Latin America has to be a billionaire. Yeah. And when we had $98 billionaires on the cusp, on the eve of the pandemic and lockdown. Between 91 and 2020, we added 3 some 1 year, 8 1 year, 12 1 year, 5 1 year. In the first year of the pandemic, we added 42. In the second year of the pandemic, we added 26. The greatest number at a time when the national GDP shrank 7.7%. 140 people in 2021 had wealth equivalent to 26% of your gross domestic product, invoking the whole other meaning of that word gross. And those 140, now 160 billionaires account for 0.000014% of your population, holding wealth equivalent to 25, a quarter of your GDP. This is the kind of inequality that was last seen in one estimate around 1921. In other estimates for all of South Asia and this thing, 1870s. That kind of inequality was last seen then. So yes, it's a very huge issue, and economic freedoms. I have to give the lady in that corner who's been patiently asking for that so long. And
just small more. The way recently there was a hunger index, and this Niti Aayog said that is the parameter we should have role. So
I know. What else will the Niti Aayog say? I remember when that organization was formed itself, my friends in Tamil Nadu called it Niti Aayog. Okay, so, yes, ma'am, I'm sorry.
I wanted to give my takeaway and lots of thanks to you, because sometimes some of us who are working on history of the little people in India, we find material not there, people have not written up certain things, and your talk has at least told me that the information exists. We have to go out and actually, like journalists, dig it up ourselves, because I'm finding that one assumes in academia that this must be somewhere there. Someone writing about literature, writing about all the other things, would have written the histories of the little people who actually change a lot of things. And I'm a linguist, and I want to know about the little people. And that I think I've understood from you that one has to get one's hands ready to go out there and talk to them themselves.
I will say this. I tell students, everywhere I speak, I tell young people, go back to your family. Some of you are young enough to have great-grandparents, let alone grandparents. Every one of your families will have a story on the freedom struggle, because that was the width of participation. Everyone, and some of those kids have reported back to me saying, yes, my Dadi Ma said this, and that she went to jail in the Satyagraha. Those are your little people, okay? And there are people who wrote jail notes and jail diaries, totally self-effacing, totally about why they were there, reflecting on why they were there. I think very much we need to be documenting those little histories.
Yeah. Go ahead. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, sir, I am a student of journalism. I'm pursuing MA right now.
Yeah.
And I saw your talk, but I think we should, since we are talking about democracy, and we are taking every side of the spectrum, and don't you think that the people from the other side of the ideological spectrum also contribute to the freedom? You know, it took us 75 years to celebrate the Janjatiya Divas of Shri Birsa Munda ji. And our previous governments, you know, they shunned that faction out. So it is my curiosity that since we are a democracy and a growing one, so don't we, you know, need to keep all the sides together at one place and have discussions?
That's what all the freedom fighters tried to do, and many achieved. Okay, but I can't invent a history for those who have none. I can't, hold on. You asked me a question. I can't invent a heroism for those who showed cowardice and, you know, betrayal of their comrades and their colleagues. You know, when I hear that, when I hear the arguments that, Savarkar, first of all, many people deny that he wrote mercy petitions. Many people write to me, where is the proof? You know, there is a thing called the National Archives. You can read 5 of the 7 petitions we know he wrote are existing there. Okay, number 1. Number 2, the other argument. Others also wrote mercy petitions. Of course they did. Do you know what those revolutionaries did? They wrote about their dying mother, grandmother, sister, wife to be released in order to get back into the battle immediately. Gurmukh Singh Lakhon, founder of the Desh Bhagat Yadgar Hall, he finished one sentence of 6 years, right? And he is, you know, good behavior and all this stuff, and he is released. Barely 2 weeks later, he is caught bombing British police barracks at a railway station. Yeah, there were others who who wrote mercy petitions and got out and resumed the war the next day against the British, the minute they landed back in the mainland. None of their mercy petitions begged for a chance to collaborate with the colonial power. You know, I cannot write a history for them. They have tried writing their histories themselves, and one of them, the best example, is Mr. Savarkar himself. Yeah. In 1926, a book appeared, The Life of Barrister Savarkar. The author was one Mr. Chitragupta. Now, in 18th, 19th centuries, Romila will correct me if I'm wrong, it was a fairly commonly used pseudonym, as I understand, from what I looked in the Asiatic Library in Mumbai and elsewhere. Now, Chitragupta, why do people favor the word Chitragupta as a pseudonym? They favor the name Chitragupta as a pseudonym because He was the scribe of Lord Yama, the Lord of Death, and therefore, you better take him seriously, right? So people use the Chitragupta pseudonym quite prolifically. So Chitragupta wrote the life of Barrister Savarkar. The far distant visionary look, and believe me, if you please read the book, I advise you to, it gives hagiography a bad name. Okay, and the mystery over who it was, by the way, some people created a theory that the book was written by C. Rajagopalachari. Now, whatever, I had huge differences with Rajagopalachari, his political bent, the direction he took, but you know what? He was a good writer. Yeah? And his translation of Ramayana and Mahabharata were what I read and grew up on as a child. The guy could write. The guy, Chitragupta, couldn't write to save his life. And he writes all these wonderful things about Savarkar. The book is proscribed, and then 1942 it is republished. In 1980, still the debate continues on who Chitragupta is. In 1986, and mind you, all the publishing houses concerned are Sanghi publishing houses. Okay? And in 1986, the brother of Mr. Savarkar reveals to the publisher who the author Chitragupta was. It turns out it was Mr. Savarkar himself. What I understood is that Mr. Savarkar had a very high opinion of Mr. Savarkar. Yeah. But he had no history. And I can't celebrate that. Yeah. Yeah, you can just raise your voice and ask. Are you an SCMite?
Yeah.
Welcome, yeah.
So I've always
So is she, by the way.
Oh, yeah, I know. So I've always been curious about your approach to research, and in this book specifically, because these stories were not mentioned in the freedom struggle, what was your approach to the research to finding these heroes?
See, one thing about the countryside, the Indian countryside, it's a journalist's paradise because you don't have to look for stories, they kick you in the face. That is one thing about, and everybody has a story. Everybody has a story. Okay? Now, some stories are more compelling than others. How did we find them? I'm saying in 1997, I did a series in the Times of India called Forgotten Freedoms. From my old history readings, one, I was determined to show that the great rebellions and uprisings that took place never started in the cities, they started in the countryside. Yeah? All the great uprisings. I went back to 5 villages that had seen incredible uprisings that shook the empire and that shook the East India Company onwards. The uprising of Veer Narayan Singh in Chhattisgarh. Veer Narayan Singh's uprising came from a village called Sonakan, deep in reserved forest today. Yeah, even today. And Chhattisgarh, 1856, 1 year before the 1857 uprising, which by the way was not a sepoy, Sipahi mutiny, the British were as murderous with their pronunciation as they were with people. It was an agrarian uprising, perhaps the greatest the world had ever seen to that point. The soldier in Meerut and the cities, Meerut and Kanpur, etc., who revolted. Then and today, the Indian Army Jawan is a Kisan in uniform When I went to the Singhu and Tikri and the Kisan Andolan, I was speaking from that stage, and there was a lot of metal glinting. There were about 50, 100 ex-servicemen sitting with medals all across their chest. Amir Malik, my colleague who is here, did a story on 5 of them. 5 of them, 63 medals, fought the Indo-China War, fought Pakistan War of 65, liberation of Bangladesh in 71, Sri Lanka in 84, and these people we were calling Khalistanis and anti-nationals. And who told us, who made the point, we are talking to you here on the Kisan agitation. Our sons and grandsons are guarding your borders at this moment as we speak. The research for it comes from also from trying to know more about your society, know more about your history. I'm saying, go back to your family and ask them, your great-grandparents, ask them to tell you about their times, their history. You can also, there are a lot of good history books that come in the 70s. Some of them may not be so accessible or readable, but there are very, very, very fine books. And which books the current dispensation has focused on erasing, removing, withdrawing from publication and circulation. Please read the histories of the Indian historians who took apart British historiography and shredded it for the rubbish it was. There is plenty to learn from there. The research, as you're talking now, I'm talking to you as journalist to journalist. The first thing you have to do about the place is to get there. Second, spend many days amongst the community you're wanting to write about. Third, don't tell their stories. In 83, 84, I made this huge mistake. I covered the then drought in 9 states and tried telling the stories, and I was a conventionally trained journalist in United News of India. Everything ends with Prime Minister said here today or Chief Minister said here today as the final authority and source. I tried so hard to tell the story, I didn't let them tell the story. I said I will go back one day and do it differently, and that's what got you Everybody Loves a Good Drought. They are telling the story. Here, I am trying to use my minimal skills as a reporter, writer, and historian, whatever little I have of the last, to give context to the stories they're telling. So if the Tufan Sena guy is saying we did this, then I'm telling you about what the Tufan Sena is, who they were, why did they come up, why were groups disillusioned with Gandhi and the Quit India movement, why did they break away and make these uprisings? And I have to tell you one very emotional moment here. Janisha, harking back to your point. In 2017, I had one of the most moving experiences. Ashok's Kisan Sabha and People's Archive of Rural India, we held a felicitation for the last living fighters of the Tufan Sena. 23 of them showed up. Many of them were in such poor physical condition. But you know why they showed up? These people who had rebelled against Gandhi, who had broken away from the Quit India movement, disillusioned by the Quit India movement, they came there because I took the man to felicitate them, Gopal Krishna Gandhi, grandson of Mohandas Karamchand. Captain Bao in the book went into tears. They wanted to touch him, they wanted to hug him. It was like saying, we fought him, we opposed him, we were adversaries, we were never enemies. We never had hatred for him. We loved the man. We were with him when he shut the movement. We decided to break away and fight. It was so emotional. All these 95, 97, 98-year-olds going up, being felicitated by Gopal, coming back in tears. Captain Bao just hugged him and wouldn't let go. Huh? That was again rising above and showing you that their division was not on religion or caste or anything of the sort. They differed with the man, but they also agreed with other things that he said, and they loved him as so many other Indians did. And the same, every one of them, for them, I think it was the ultimate moment of their last years. Captain Bao said so.
Sainath, a couple have died since you started writing this.
More than. Since September last year, 8 have died.
8.
Another 8 are alive. 3 of them in Purulia. One more, I guess, in Purulia. The most closest to you in proximity is Shobaram Geharwar. He's alive. Babani Mahato is alive. Telu and Loki Mahato are alive. Banalata Mahato is alive. Shankaraya and Nallakana are, showing no signs of fatigue, COVID or otherwise. And so these are alive. Captain Bao died this February. Hausa Bai died last September. Bhagat Singh Jugian died in March. And as Amir says, it was almost like, and I also felt it, their story had been told. We had carried the initial stories in the People's Archive. Bhagat Singh, when I met him the second time at the Desh Bhagat Yadgar Hall, he asked, "Kitab aa rahi hai kya?" Mallu Swarajam asked me, "When is my book coming?" When is my book coming? Okay, I feel horrible, and yet I think that they knew that their story was told. And it was done that nothing that they contradicted is in the story. They vetted and verified what we wrote about them.
Are there any more questions, or should we close the evening? Please go ahead, ma'am.
I want to make this comment for the journalists. I see many in the audience. One of those heroes, one of those 15, the only one who completed his degree. Salihan never saw a school in her life. The only one who completed a degree, Shankaraya, was a top student of the American College Madurai. And I think it's a bloody disgrace that the top student who was imprisoned 15 days before he was the founder of the Tamil Poetry Sangam, Tamil Poetry Literary Society of American College, arrested 15 days before he finishes his and would emerge as college and possibly university topper. He is taken and put in prison in February 1941, and is released 12 hours before independence dawns. And doesn't go back to family, home. He joins the freedom procession to the Madurai main ground, corporation ground, to celebrate the coming of independence, which he gave so much for. He never completed his degree, and to this day, American College Madurai has not honored him, not just with the damn BA, they should have given him a PhD. Yeah. And Doreswamy, one thing about all these guys, they all had, and girls, they had an acerbic sense of sarcasm and humor. Mallu Swarajam, I feared her for that reason, okay? I would get it. If I did anything that she thought was unrevolutionary, you were asking to cop it. And Doreswamy, I want all you journalists to know this. The story of Doreswamy is that he registered he was fighting the Mysore Chalo movement against the Mysore Maharaja, and he registered a newspaper. When they were going to shut it down, he moved across the border to Anantapur and registered the newspaper one newspaper under 5 titles. So that when they shut down one, the same newspaper would appear the next day under a closely related title. Many Indian journalists did this. Okay? From here to Nepal, you will find editors. Amrit Bazar Patrika went to protest against the Vernacular Press Act, overnight converted into an English newspaper from a Bengali newspaper.
And the fact Doraiswamy was called a fake freedom fighter.
And the RSS had called, the minister of the Karnataka government called him a fake freedom fighter, to which his humor was so beautiful. Any reporter went to ask him what he's doing. He would be writing always, scribbling. I asked him what is he doing. In fact, I first read about it in the Indian Express, reporter asking him. And then, of course, everybody else asked him that question. He would be writing, and what are you doing? He's saying, I'm writing my CV, it's being challenged. And look at that humor with which he faced up to it. By the way, in the last 3 years, more than 100 journalists have had FIRs lodged against them, been thrown in jails. Siddiq Kappan has spent 2 years there. Yeah, at one occasion chained to a hospital bed and asked to urinate into a bottle. Yeah, this is the challenge before journalists. Will we be journalists or will we be stenographers to power? Thank you.
Should we close? Okay. Thank you. There's nothing more to say, but please purchase the book. Please read every story. Please write to Sainath. Please read them on PARI.
And please visit the People's Archive of Rural India by scanning that and look at the rest of the archive as well. You'll see the climate justice stories too.
Thank you. Thank you, Sainath.